Okay, this is number 6 in the Joseph H. Jackson testimony of what went on with Joseph Smith in Nauvoo, his spiritual wife system, and the Danites. He's about to go on a midnight ride with the boys, the Danites, on a mission. Alright, I then asked him if he would go with me to put up my horse. He said yes, and drew on his boots, and got a light prepared. While this was going on, the old woman eyed me very sharply and said that this was her son, and that he was going to Missouri in the morning to testify against Avery, a horse thief, and that the reason that she suspected me to be from Nauvoo was because they'd been looking for some of Joe Smith's Danite band to prevent him from going, and concluded by saying, "I know him of old, and he must not send his men after my son. If he does, I'll have their cursed hearts out." "Yes," said I, "and I will help you." We then left the house to feed my horse. When we got a little distance, I told him what I wanted. He raised a shovel that was standing near the fence and bade me not come near him. I then drew my pistol and told him to put down the shovel or I'd blow his brains out. Here the company came up, and I told Richardson that if he would go along, he should receive no harm. He finally consented, got his horse, and mounted him, and I delivered him to the charge of Carnes. We then had another to take, the boy, Childs, I think that is the name, who lived in the neighborhood. We made Richardson pilot us, but he pretended not to know exactly where the boy was, and stopped at his neighbor's, as the company thought, to inquire, but in reality to give the alarm. After we got the boy, I called Stout to one side, and told him that he had foolishly let Richardson talk with his neighbors, and that there would be a plot laid to stop us. He seemed to think there was no danger, and said if it proved so, Richardson would be the first man shot. I will here state that my plan was to release Richardson at Montrose, where I thought I could do it without being suspected by either party, by raising an alarm, and it being dark, no one would know who did it. I told Stout, however, that I did not like our situation, for I did not want to be caught kidnapping, as our situation would be very unpleasant. I would have left the company immediately had it not been that I could not benefit Richardson without exposing myself, and all I had was in Nauvoo, and I still desired to keep up appearances with Joe, that when I did expose him, I might do it to some purpose. When we got within a half-mile of Montrose, Richardson, who had previously, by fair promises, induced Carnes to give up the halter of his horse, which he had held in his hand during most of the journey, put spurs and ran into the town. At this time the boy was on behind me, and of course I could make but little speed. The others, however, started after Richardson, and I expected to find them all in town. When I arrived at the old barracks, I was surprised to find Carnes and Stout alone, sitting on their horses. I asked where the balance of the company was, but they did not know, and appeared to be waiting for them to come up. I suggested that they had gone up to town, and urged them to follow on with me. So on we went. But on arriving at Peck's store, we were surrounded by about 15 men, whom Richardson's friends had aroused, and who were armed with guns and bayonets. They soon took off the lad from behind me, and Richardson pointed to me and said to one of the gang, "Uncle John, this is the man that drew a pistol on me and said he would shoot if I did not drop my shovel." With this, the old fellow, who was very stout, seized the bridle of my horse and ordered me to turn around and go back to Carpenter's Tavern, saying that lynch laws was good enough for me, and that I should have until sunrise to say my prayers. This made Eyre feel rather curious. Eyre? But I determined on a bold push to extricate myself. I drew my pistol, and pointing it directly at the old fellow's head, said I, "Let go my horse, or I'll blow off the cap piece of your skull." This confounded him so completely that he loosed his hold and jumped back. With this I gave a loud yell, struck my horse with the pistol, and bounded through the men, who stood with fixed bayonets immediately in front of me. My horse received 3 bayonet wounds, but I escaped unhurt. Poor horse. They fired on me, but it being too dark to see a rod ahead, they shot at random. Stout, that's Hosea Stout, I imagine, in the meantime escaped in the confusion, and we ran our horses to the ferry boat, where we found the balance of the company we had lost. We all boarded the boat, Carnes being, as we thought, in possession of the people of Montrose, and rowed for our lives over to Nauvoo. On arriving there, we found Joe, partially dressed, wrapped in his mantle. He had heard the report of guns on the other side, and had got up at this early hour, which was for him very unusual, to see what had happened. On landing, we told him our story. I damned the men as a pack of cowards for having left myself, Stout, and Carnes. On learning that Carnes was still in Montrose, the prophet raised an alarm, called out the legion, and gave orders to pass over the river and release Brother Carnes, who, he said, had been kidnapped by the Missourians. The whole city was thus thrown into confusion, and hundreds rushed to the Ever, and crossed over, must have been river, over in all manner of crafts. While this was going on, Carnes was discovered in a canoe paddling across the river toward above town. All hands went to meet him, and as he landed they cried out, "Hallelujah! Glory to God! Well done, Brother Carnes," etc. Carnes was utterly confounded. At these demonstrations, but kept still. He could not, however, have looked meaner had he been detected in sheep stealing. So well did Joe manage this affair that to this day the people of Nauvoo generally believe that Carnes was in reality kidnapped by the Missourians, and of course the story told by the people of Montrose was set down by Joe's honest dupes to the credit of persecution. Thus ended this nefarious plot, which had it so far succeeded as to have got Richardson to Nauvoo. The order of Joe was to tie an iron bar to his shoulders and throw him into the Mississippi for catfish food. Well, it doesn't sound like the prophet's that loving and kind, does it? My action in this affair gave Joe the greatest confidence in me, and aided the belief that I was in reality a desperado. He now threw off all the restraint under which he had previously acted, and seemed no longer to doubt that I would readily carry any measure of his, no matter how black or damnable. In consequence of my having made so great a conquest of his confidence by my conduct in this affair, I was admitted into all his secret counsel, and was confided in so far that he disclosed to me every act of his life that he had occasion to refer to in conversation. By this means I became possessed of facts in relation to the plundering, murdering, and counterfeiting operation in which Joe had been for years engaged, and which he is aided by accomplices throughout the country. As these things were merely disclosed to me by Joe, I will not venture at present to mention names, but I believe that if the government and the people would raise the means and enter in a proper spirit into measures to ferret out the villains, I could disclose facts sufficient to lead to the detection of numbers of a band of scoundrels who infest the whole county, and have their headquarters at Nauvoo. Yes, this far-famed holy city of Nauvoo has been the hiding place of more stolen goods, horses, and thieves than any other spot on earth, and there, under the protection of the city ordinance, which forbid an officer of justice to search for persons on our property, unless the writ was first endorsed by Joe and executed by the city marshal, they remained in perfect security. It is not the country in the immediate vicinity of Nauvoo that alone suffers from the depredations of these land pirates. The whole state, and Iowa and Missouri, to a great extent, feel the scourge. Yes, in Missouri, Joe Smith has his friends and emissaries, but enough of this. My object is to tell what I saw and heard of events passing before me, and not what was transpiring at a distance. When, however, the time arrives, I will not be silent. It was shortly after the adventure I have related above, 15th of January 1844, that Joe informed me in conversation that he had been endeavoring for some 2 months to get Mrs. William Law for a spiritual wife. He said that he had used every argument in his power to convince her of the correctness of his doctrine, but could not succeed. I then asked him how he dare preach such doctrine to virtuous and well-meaning females in the name of the Lord, and in relation to the particular course he was pursuing towards Mrs. Law. I remarked that it astonished me to see him profess so great friendship for Law, while at the same time he was endeavoring to destroy his happiness by the seduction of his wife. To this he replied that Law was trying to seduce Emma, and he was determined to beat him. I then asked him if Emma knew of his having so many spiritual wives, to which he replied that she did, and was knowing to every act of his life, and he believed she was the most virtuous woman on earth, and that she even would not be true to him if she could get a chance. But, said he, I wash her close and mean too, so long as I live. I then asked him if he could blame Law if he should seduce Emma. He seemed to think that Law would not do such a thing. I then reminded that he had just said that Law had tried to seduce Emma in order to justify his own proceedings with Law's wife, but that now he was contradicting himself by expressing so much confidence in Law. To get out of this dilemma, he said that the truth was Emma wanted Law for a spiritual husband, and that she urged as a reason that he had so many spiritual wives. She thought it but fair that she should at least have one man spiritually sealed up to her, and that she wanted Law because he was such a sweet little man. He then tried to persuade me to aid him in his purpose on Mrs. Law, and said that he would employ any stratagem in order to accomplish his object, and went on to say that he and Emma had both tried to persuade her of the correctness of the doctrine, but that she would not believe it to be of God. I told him that he must carry his plot himself, for I would have nothing to do with such things. But he remarked that if all parties were agreed, that he and Law had better swap wives. That's what Jackson said. Okay, next video.